The auctioneer's gavel hung suspended in the humid afternoon air, and every soul in Millbrook's auction yard held their breath. 47-year-old Cornelius Hartwell stood at the back of the crowd, his weathered hands trembling as he clutched a single, crumpled dollar bill, the last remnant of a fortune that had once made him the wealthiest man in 3 counties. 6 months ago, Cornelius had owned the largest grain operation in the state. His silos stretched across thousands of acres, and his name was whispered with reverence in farming circles from here to the capital. But a devastating drought, followed by an unexpected market crash, had stripped him of everything. His wife, Magnolia, had taken their twin daughters, Clementine and Persephone, back to her mother's house in the city, unable to watch their empire crumble any longer. Now, standing among neighbors who once sought his advice and business partners who had abandoned him, Cornelius faced the auction of his final possession, his prized stallion. Thunderstrike, the magnificent gray horse, had been his companion for 8 years, a creature of such intelligence and spirit that local legends had grown around their bond. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty lot, we have here the finest piece of horseflesh this side of Kentucky. Thunderstrike, sired by champion bloodlines, trained by the best, the crowd murmured appreciatively. Cornelius watched as his former friend, wealthy rancher Beauregard Pemberton, adjusted his hat and prepared to bid. Beside him stood livestock dealer Maximilian Crosby, whose calculating eyes assessed the horse like a commodity. These men had the resources to care for Thunderstrike properly, but Cornelius knew they saw only profit potential, not the soul of the magnificent animal. Bidding starts at $500, the auctioneer announced. Hands shot up immediately. Pemberton bid $800. Crosby countered with $1,000. The price climbed steadily. $1,500, $2,000, $2,500. Cornelius felt his heart breaking with each increment. He had raised Thunderstrike from a colt, spent countless hours training him, shared sunrise rides across fields that were no longer his. The bidding slowed at $3,000. Pemberton and Crosby engaged in a fierce back and forth, their rivalry apparent to everyone present. The crowd watched with fascination as the two titans of local agriculture battled over the stallion. $3,500, Pemberton called out, his voice strained. $3,700, Crosby responded without hesitation. $3,800, $4,000 even. The auctioneer looked between the two men. Do I hear $4,100? Pemberton hesitated, his jaw working as he calculated. The silence stretched on, pregnant with anticipation. In that moment, something stirred within Cornelius, a desperate, illogical impulse that defied every rational thought. $1, he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. People turned to stare at the broken man in the back, some with pity, others with confusion. The auctioneer blinked, clearly taken aback. Sir, the current bid is for $1,000. Did you mean to say for $1,001? Cornelius stepped forward, his legs unsteady, but his voice growing stronger. No, sir, I bid $1. $1 for my horse. The crowd fell silent. Even Thunderstrike, who had been restless in his pen, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. The stallion's dark eyes found Cornelius across the yard, and something passed between them, a recognition, a shared understanding of loss and loyalty. The auctioneer stared at Cornelius as if he had suddenly sprouted wings. Sir, I'm afraid that's not how auctions work. The current bid stands at $4,000. You cannot bid below that amount. But Cornelius wasn't listening to the rules anymore. He had spent his entire life following rules, building his empire through calculated decisions and careful planning. Now, with nothing left to lose, he felt a strange liberation washing over him. I know my horse, he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Thunderstrike, and I have an understanding. If he chooses me, if he wants to come with me, then my dollar should be worth more than all their thousands. Pemberton scoffed loudly. This is ridiculous. The man's lost his mind along with his money. Clearly the stress has gotten to him, Crosby added, shaking his head. Can we please continue with the proper bidding? But something extraordinary happened. Thunderstrike, who had been standing quietly in the auction pen, suddenly reared up, on his hind legs, his powerful hooves striking the air. The crowd gasped and stepped back as the stallion's whinny echoed across the yard, not the panicked cry of a frightened animal, but something that sounded almost like a call. The horse's eyes remained fixed on Cornelius, and slowly, deliberately, Thunderstrike walked to the edge of the pen closest to his former owner. The stallion extended his neck through the fence rails, reaching toward the man who had raised him. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered old Jasper Whitmore, the town's veterinarian. "In 40 years of treating horses, I've never seen anything like that." The auctioneer, a professional named Barnabas Tate, who had been conducting sales for 2 decades, found himself at a loss for words. He had seen emotional moments before, families bidding on heirloom pieces, desperate farmers trying to buy back their land, but this was different. The connection between man and horse was palpable, almost mystical. "Mr. Hartwell," Tate said carefully, "I appreciate your unique approach, but legally speaking, the highest monetary bid must win. That's simply how auctions function." Cornelius nodded slowly, understanding, but not accepting. He pulled the dollar bill from his pocket and held it up for everyone to see. The bill was worn and creased, but in the late afternoon sunlight, it seemed to carry more weight than the thousands of dollars represented by his competitors. "This dollar," he said, his voice growing stronger, "represents everything I have left, not just monetarily, but spiritually. Every morning I've woken up for 8 years, the first thing I've seen is Thunderstrike's face. Every evening, the last thing I've done is check on him. This isn't just about money, it's about honor, about loyalty, about the bonds that can't be bought or sold." Magnolia, who had been standing with their daughters at the edge of the crowd, stepped forward. Despite their separation, she had come to witness this final goodbye. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her husband make his last stand. "Daddy," 6-year-old Persephone whispered, "why is Thunderstrike looking at you like that?" Indeed, the horse's behavior had become even more unusual. Thunderstrike was nodding his head repeatedly, as if agreeing with something only he could understand. The stallion's hooves stamped the ground in a rhythm that seemed almost like applause. Young Deputy Sheriff Octavius Kane, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. "Now, I'm no expert on horse psychology, but that animal is clearly trying to tell us something." The crowd began to murmur among themselves. Some called it nonsense. Others wondered if there might be more to this strange situation than met the eye. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the auction yard, and the entire scene took on an almost dreamlike quality. Pemberton, growing impatient, raised his hand again. "For $1,000 to $100. Let's end this circus." But before the auctioneer could respond, Thunderstrike did something that made everyone's blood run cold. The stallion reared up again, this time more violently, and let out a sound that was neither whinny nor neigh. It was something primal, almost human in its emotion. The sound that emerged from Thunderstrike's throat sent a chill through every person in the auction yard. It wasn't the typical vocalization of a horse, it was deeper, more resonant, carrying an emotional weight that seemed to bypass rational thought and speak directly to the heart. Dr. Whitmore, the veterinarian, pushed through the crowd to get a better look. "In all my years, I've never heard a horse make that sound," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's almost like he's mourning." The stallion's behavior became increasingly erratic. He paced within the confines of the pen, his hooves striking the ground in complex patterns. Some in the crowd began to whisper about old wives' tales, stories of horses who could sense death, who could predict disasters, who possessed an intelligence that transcended their species. Cornelius felt drawn to the pen as if by an invisible force. Against the protests of the auction staff, he approached the fence. The moment he came within reach, Thunderstrike calmed instantly. The horse pressed his massive head against Cornelius's chest, and the man wrapped his arms around the stallion's neck. "I know, boy," Cornelius whispered. "I know you don't want to leave either." The crowd watched in stunned silence as horse and man shared what appeared to be a private moment of goodbye. Even Pemberton and Crosby, despite their skepticism, found themselves moved by the obvious bond between the two. But then something happened that defied explanation. Thunderstrike suddenly pulled away from Cornelius and walked to the center of the pen. The horse stood perfectly still for a moment, as if making a decision. Then, with deliberate precision, he began to move. The stallion's movements were unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. He pranced in a perfect circle, his hooves striking the ground in a rhythmic pattern that seemed almost musical. As he moved, his head bobbed up and down, and his tail swished. In time with his steps, it was as if he was performing some ancient ritual, some equine ceremony that spoke to powers beyond human understanding. "What in the Sam Hill is he doing?" Pemberton muttered, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine bewilderment. Octavius Kane, who had been taking notes for his report, stopped writing entirely. "I've seen trained circus horses before, but this is something else entirely." The horse's dance continued for several minutes, growing more elaborate with each passing moment. He reared up on his hind legs, spun in place, and even appeared to bow toward different sections of the crowd. The gathered townspeople found themselves mesmerized, unable to look away from the spectacle. Finally, Thunderstrike stopped directly in front of where Cornelius stood. The horse extended his right front hoof and pawed the ground 3 times. Then, in a gesture that made several people gasp aloud, the stallion lowered his head and appeared to nod directly at the crumpled dollar bill in Cornelius's hand. Did he just choose?" asked Martha Abernathy, the town's librarian. The auctioneer, Barnabas Tate, found himself in an unprecedented situation. In 20 years of conducting sales, he had never encountered anything remotely similar. The rules of auction were clear, but the circumstances were anything but normal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice uncertain, "I must confess that the situation is unique. The horse appears to be exhibiting behavior that suggests a preference for Mr. Hartwell's bid." "A preference?" Crosby exploded. "It's a damn horse. Animals don't get to choose their owners in an auction." But even as he spoke, Thunderstrike was repeating his performance. The stallion walked directly to the pen's gate and began pushing against it with his nose. When that failed to open it, he reared up and struck the gate with his hooves, not violently, but with the precision of someone knocking on a door. Dr. Whitmore stepped forward, his medical bag in hand. "I'd like to examine the animal," he announced. "This behavior is so unusual that I want to ensure there's nothing physically wrong with him." The veterinarian entered the pen cautiously, but Thunderstrike stood perfectly still for the examination. After several minutes of checking the horse's eyes, ears, and vital signs, Dr. Whitmore emerged with a puzzled expression. "He's in perfect health," the doctor reported. "In fact, I've rarely seen a horse in such excellent condition. Whatever he's doing, it's not the result of illness or distress." The crowd began to buzz with excitement and confusion. Some called it a miracle, others insisted it was merely coincidence. But everyone present could sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would be talked about in Millbrook for generations to come. Word of the unusual auction spread through Millbrook like wildfire. Within an hour, the crowd had doubled in size as curious townspeople abandoned their afternoon activities to witness the spectacle. The mayor, Horatio Blackstone, arrived with his aide, followed by the local newspaper editor, Cordelia Fairweather, who frantically scribbled notes while her photographer captured the scene. The situation had evolved beyond a simple auction into something approaching a town crisis. Pemberton and Crosby, both influential men with considerable political and economic power, demanded that the sale proceed according to normal rules. They had the law on their side. Auctions were governed by clear regulations, and emotional appeals, however moving, couldn't override legal procedures. "This is preposterous," Pemberton declared to anyone who would listen. "We're allowing sentiment to override business sense. What's next? Are we going to let every broke farmer bid pennies for property worth thousands?" But a significant portion of the crowd disagreed. The story of Cornelius Hartwell's fall from grace had touched many hearts in the community. Here was a man who had once been generous with his wealth, who had provided employment for dozens of families, who had contributed to every church and charity in the county. His ruin had been swift and brutal, caused by forces beyond his control. That Man lost everything through no fault of his own, argued Prudence Goodwin, who ran the local boarding house. The least we can do is honor his bond with his horse. Honor doesn't pay bills, Crosby countered. $4,000 is $4,000, regardless of who's bidding. The debate raged while Thunderstrike continued his extraordinary behavior. The stallion had taken to following Cornelius's movements around the pen's perimeter, maintaining eye contact through the fence rails. Whenever Cornelius moved to a different position, the horse would adjust his stance to face him directly. Young Clementine and Persephone, who had been watching quietly with their mother, suddenly broke free from Magnolia's grasp and ran toward the pen. The crowd parted to let them through, and the girls pressed their faces against the fence rails. "Thunderstrike," Clementine called out. "Do you remember us?" The horse's reaction was immediate and profound. He whinnied softly and nuzzled the girl's hands through the fence, his demeanor completely gentle despite the tension of the situation. The sight of the broken family reunited with their beloved horse brought tears to many eyes. "That settles it for me," announced Reverend Zachariah Millstone, the town's most respected spiritual leader. "I've ministered to this community for 30 years, and I've never seen a clearer example of divine providence. That horse is choosing his family, and we should respect that choice." But Mayor Blackstone faced a difficult decision. The auction was legally binding, and interfering with it could set a dangerous precedent. Yet the entire town was watching, and public opinion was clearly divided. Perhaps, the mayor suggested diplomatically, we could reach some sort of compromise. Pemberton shook his head vigorously. "No compromise. I bid for $1,000 to $100, which is considerably more than the animal's market value. The sale should proceed according to law." At that moment, something unexpected happened. Thunderstrike, who had been quietly interacting with the girls, suddenly became agitated again. He began pacing frantically within the pen, his hooves striking the ground in that same rhythmic pattern from before. Dr. Whitmore, who had been observing the horse's behavior closely, stepped forward with a startling announcement. "I believe this horse is trying to communicate something specific," he said. "The pattern of his movements, the timing of his vocalizations, it's too consistent to be random." "What are you suggesting?" Mayor Blackstone asked. "I'm suggesting that we're witnessing a level of animal intelligence that defies conventional understanding. This horse knows exactly what's happening here, and he's making a deliberate choice." The crowd fell silent as the implications of the veterinarian's words sank in. If Thunderstrike was indeed capable of understanding the auction process, then his preference for Cornelius's bid took on entirely new significance. Cordelia Fairweather, the newspaper editor, saw the story of a lifetime unfolding before her eyes. "Dr. Whitmore," she called out, "are you saying that this horse possesses human-like consciousness?" "I'm saying that what we're witnessing challenges everything we thought we knew about animal cognition," the veterinarian replied carefully. "And I believe we have a moral obligation to take that into account." As the debate continued, Thunderstrike's behavior became even more extraordinary. The stallion had begun what could only be described as a performance, not the random movements of an agitated animal, but a deliberate, choreographed display that seemed designed to communicate with the human audience. The horse walked to each corner of the pen, pausing at each point to paw the ground exactly 3 times. Then he returned to the center and repeated his earlier bowing motion, this time directing it specifically toward Cornelius. The precision and intentionality of his actions were undeniable. "Look at his eyes," whispered Martha Abernathy. "Look how intelligent they are." Indeed, Thunderstrike's eyes held an awareness that seemed almost human. As he moved through his routine, his gaze swept across the crowd, appearing to make contact with individual faces. Some people later swore that the horse had looked directly at them, as if assessing their character. Cornelius, meanwhile, had fallen to his knees beside the pen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. His beloved horse was fighting for their bond with every fiber of his being, demonstrating a loyalty that transcended species boundaries. "Thunderstrike," he whispered, "I wish I could give you the life you deserve." The horse's response was immediate and heartbreaking. Thunderstrike pressed his head against the fence, positioning himself as close to Cornelius as the barrier would allow. Then, in a gesture that brought gasps from the crowd, the stallion began to paw at the ground near Cornelius's feet. Dr. Whitmore moved closer to observe. "He's drawing something," the veterinarian announced in amazement. "Look at the pattern. In the dirt." The crowd pressed forward to see what the horse had traced in the dust. There, clear as day, was a rough but recognizable heart shape, with lines extending from it that appeared to represent the outline of a human figure. "That's impossible," Crosby muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Reverend Millstone asked. "Or are we simply witnessing something that our limited understanding cannot fully grasp?" The auctioneer, Barnabas Tate, found himself facing the most difficult decision of his career. The crowd was clearly expecting him to make a ruling, but the situation had moved far beyond the realm of normal auction procedures. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I must confess that in 20 years of conducting sales, I have never encountered circumstances like these. The law is clear about auction procedures, but—" He paused, looking around at the sea of expectant faces. "But sometimes the spirit of the law must take precedence over the letter of the law." Pemberton stepped forward angrily. "Are you saying you're going to ignore a legitimate $4,000 bid in favor of a single dollar?" "I'm saying," Tate replied slowly, "that I'm going to let the horse decide." The crowd erupted in murmurs of excitement and confusion. This was unprecedented. An auction where the item being sold would choose its own buyer. "How exactly do you propose to do that?" Crosby demanded. The auctioneer gestured toward the pen. "We're going to open that gate and see what happens. If Thunderstrike goes to Mr. Hartwell, then his bid wins. If the horse chooses either of you gentlemen, then the highest monetary bid stands." "This is insane," Pemberton protested, but his objection was drowned out by the crowd's approval. Mayor Blackstone, sensing the public mood, gave his official approval. "I think that's a fair solution. Let the horse choose." The gate was opened, and the crowd held its collective breath. Thunderstrike stood at the threshold for a moment, his head held high, his eyes scanning the faces before him. The silence was so complete that the sound of his breathing was audible to everyone present. Then, with dignity befitting a king, the magnificent stallion walked directly to Cornelius Hartwell and gently nuzzled his shoulder. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and many people wiped away tears as they witnessed this extraordinary demonstration of loyalty and love. But the miracle wasn't over yet. As Cornelius embraced his horse, Thunderstrike did something that no one could have predicted. The stallion walked to where Clementine and Persephone stood with their mother, and he gently nudged all three of them toward Cornelius. "He's bringing our family back together," Magnolia whispered, tears streaming down her face. The events that followed would be remembered as the day Millbrook witnessed a miracle. As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with excitement about what they had seen, the Hartwell family found themselves reunited around their beloved horse. The symbolic power of Thunderstrike's choice had somehow bridged the gap that financial ruin had created between husband and wife. "I'm sorry I left," Magnolia said, her hand resting on Cornelius's shoulder as he stroked Thunderstrike's neck. "I couldn't bear to watch everything fall apart, but I should have stayed." "You did what you thought was best for the girls," Cornelius replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't blame you. I failed as a provider." Sunset at the finish line. Barnaby embraces Rosebud, pressing his forehead to hers. Cornelius stands humbled, head in hand, staring at the mare with newfound respect. The townsfolk celebrate. Martha wipes tears. Harvey claps Barnaby's back. Children pet Rosebud's heaving sides. "No, Daddy," Persephone said, wrapping her small arms around his leg. "You didn't fail. Thunderstrike chose you, and he's the smartest horse in the world." The practical matter of what to do next remained. Cornelius had his horse, but he still had no money, no home, and no prospects. The single dollar he had bid was truly all he possessed. But the people of Millbrook had been moved by what they had witnessed. Reverend Millstone was the first to step forward. "Brother Cornelius," he said, "the church has a small caretaker's cottage behind the rectory. It's yours for as long as you need it, and I've got 20 acres of pasture that's sitting empty," added Jasper Whitmore. "Thunderstrike can graze there without charge." One by one, members of the community offered assistance. Prudence Goodwin, promised meals from her boarding house. Octavius Kane mentioned that the sheriff's department needed someone to help with their horses. Even some of Cornelius's former competitors, moved by the day's events, offered opportunities for employment. Pemberton and Crosby, while disappointed by the auction's outcome, had been genuinely affected by what they had witnessed. "I still think the whole thing was irregular," Pemberton admitted, "but I'll be damned if that wasn't the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen." Crosby nodded in agreement. "That horse has more character than most people I know." "You're a lucky man, Hartwell." As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across the auction yard, the Hartwell family prepared to begin their new life. It wouldn't be easy. They would face financial challenges for months to come, but they would face them together. Dr. Whitmore approached Cornelius with a proposition. "I'd like to study Thunderstrike's behavior, with your permission. What happened here today challenges everything we know about animal intelligence. If we can understand it better, it might help other horses and their owners." Cornelius considered the request. "As long as it doesn't harm him, I'm willing. But I suspect you'll find that what happened today can't be explained by science alone." The veterinarian smiled. "I'm beginning to think you're right." 6 months later, Cornelius Hartwell had rebuilt his life, though on a smaller scale than before. He worked as the town's horse trainer and veterinary assistant, using his expertise to help other families care for their animals. Magnolia had started a small bakery, and their daughters attended the local school, where they often entertained their classmates with stories about their miraculous horse. Thunderstrike became something of a local celebrity, drawing visitors from neighboring towns who wanted to meet the horse that had chosen love over money. The stallion seemed to understand his fame, carrying himself with dignity while never losing his gentle nature with children. The story of the auction spread far beyond Millbrook, appearing in newspapers across the state and eventually the nation. Cordelia Fairweather's article, titled "The Horse That Chose Love," won a journalism award and brought the small town unexpected attention. But for Cornelius, the most important change was the healing of his relationship with his family. The crisis had taught them all that wealth was temporary, but love, the kind of love that Thunderstrike had demonstrated, was eternal. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the girls were asleep, Cornelius would walk out to the pasture where Thunderstrike grazed. The horse would always lift his head at his approach, and the two would stand together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Thank you, old friend," Cornelius would whisper. "You saved more than just yourself that day." And Thunderstrike, with the wisdom that had so amazed the people of Millbrook, would nod his great head as if he understood every word. The town had witnessed a miracle, but more than that, they had learned that the bonds between living beings transcend the material world. In an age of increasing cynicism and commercialism, they had seen proof that love, loyalty, and faith could triumph over even the harshest circumstances. The auction yard was eventually converted into a small park, with a statue of a horse and man at its center. The inscription read, "In memory of the day we learned that some things cannot be bought or sold, only chosen, and in the hearts of all who witnessed it." The story of Cornelius Hartwell and Thunderstrike lived on as a testament to the enduring power of love to overcome any obstacle, proving that sometimes the most valuable things in life are worth exactly $1, if that dollar represents everything you have to give.